Well, we're going to get the perspective of two top party activists right now. Travis Horn is the founder and CEO of Bullhorn Communications and a Republican. And Alan Cohn is a former candidate for the U.S. House, a journalist and a Democrat. And nice to see you both.
Nice to be here.
Thank you for coming on. I want to ask you about the Washington Post, which reported this week that former President Barack Obama has told allies in recent days that President Biden's path to victory has greatly diminished, and he thinks the president needs to seriously consider the viability of his candidacy, according to multiple people briefed on his thinking. On Friday, 4 Democrats came out and said that President Biden should drop out, and it's been reported that members of Biden's family have discussed what an exit from his campaign might look like. So, Alan, should the president drop out, and do you think he's on the verge of dropping out?
Well, it seems like the story is moving in that direction. I know, talking to Florida Democrats, they are prepared one way or the other to either support the president or support the vice president or whoever would take that position and work hard for them. I think that there is a good chance by the time Democrats meet in Chicago in 3 or 4 weeks, it will be a different situation. We'll be talking about a different storyline, and we will not be talking about issues of age and energy. I think that, especially after what we witnessed last night with the former president, I think that there will be added motivation to win this fall.
Do you think Florida Democrats are fired up about Kamala Harris?
Yes, I think that the vice president has come to Florida. I think that Democrats are so motivated to make sure that when voters make their decision once again that they reject Donald Trump again, that they would support the vice president or whoever emerges as the general election candidate, if it's not the president.
Yeah, Travis, the Democratic Party's in disarray. What do you think about it?
Significantly different view. I think if Joe Biden was going to get out, they should have gotten him out earlier on. It's not like we knew he didn't have a problem cognitively. There was some decline, obviously, right? Especially over the last 4 years. He wasn't that sharp in the first election. He just was the guy who wasn't Trump, and he lost that little bit of the middle, or he gained that little bit of the middle. So I think Harris probably has super high negatives. That she's never been discussed as a very serious replacement. I mean, she was a VP, but she was never. No one really wanted her. It sounds like even in Democrat quarters wanted her to lead. So I think it could be, the bloodbath that could have been at the Republican convention had Donald Trump been actually killed in Pennsylvania. Yeah. That I had this nightmare scenario for a few minutes when he went down on the stage that could be the case, a convention of old, as it were. Could be the case for Democrats, and I think that the rank and file are going to have a problem with, hey, you sold us Joe Biden. He was a great guy a month ago or two, and now you're telling us you're gonna pick at the convention. There's going to be a problem with some rank and file Democrats.
If you were to match the negatives of Kamala Harris and the negatives of J.D. Vance, whose negatives are worse, do you think?
I don't know, but I know the calculus for J.D. Vance being at least the hope. There's not a lot of science when it comes to VP picks and their influence on races. Political scientists will tell you that. But the hunch is that JD is going to resonate with some of those Rust Belt folks. And I think so too. And if you've seen Hillbilly Elegy and you look at that story, it's such an amazing story. He's got a leg up on her from that perspective.
Alan, what do you think of JD Vance as a vice presidential pick?
Well, first thing, historically, vice presidential picks don't determine elections. Having said that, JD Vance is an extremist. And I heard him say just the other day, or a quote from him, that when it comes to abortions in terms of rape victims, that we should not determine whether a child is born or not by the inconvenience of their inception. And I think that given the way that Americans feel about a woman's right to choose, 67% of Americans believe that a woman should make her own health care decisions up to 3 months of pregnancy, that J.D. Vance and Republicans in general are out of step with how Americans feel, and that's just going to come out in the next few weeks and months.
I think J.D. Made those statements a couple years ago, and then he's changed, and he said there should be some exceptions because the American public agrees with that. So I guess it depends on which version of J.D. Vance you want to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Well, and the party just removed literally I was amazed, removed abortion from the platform.
And does-
so I think
does
I
that-
think that's an acquiescence to the idea that
Does
states'
that
rights.
anger right to life activists?
I'm sure it's got some of them unsettled. I haven't spoken to any of them lately, but I believe there were some protesters up at the convention, and certainly there's some that do take the view that there is no exception. More of a Reagan approach to that too. I think in cases of rape and incest, I couldn't see where we force a woman to carry a child to term.
Let's talk about Trump's speech. There seemed to be two speeches. One was kind of a warm and fuzzy speech, very emotional at the beginning for the first half hour, and then he veered back to attacking Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, the use of the legal system against Republicans, and immigration. Immigration was a big topic in that last hour of the president's speech.
I must have nodded off a little bit through that. I felt like it was. I think on the bulk a unity speech. He said. I think he said Biden's name one time. But definitely, politics is about laying out the differences in us and them, and I think he did that.
It was absolutely a unity speech. It reminded all Americans how bizarre every day of his presidency was. It was one of the most bizarre speeches in American political history, and it is a snapshot. And that moment of the convention is now over, and Americans were once again introduced to what would happen if Donald Trump ever returned to the White House, which is why I believe that voters will reject him once again.
Do you think that the Republicans this time are going after the base only?
Well, if you look at the other speeches at that convention, absolutely. I saw very little that would reach out to those, few Americans who don't have an opinion at this point. But the thing is, I think both sides would agree that this election is going to come down to a pretty narrow set of voters who I don't know stayed up there like all of us and watched all 4 days of this convention. I think people make their decisions based upon sometimes vague impressions of the candidates. And so I don't know if the conventions in and of themselves, if you watch every single speech, is really affecting the polls or how Americans vote.
We'll see what the bump is. There's typically opposed to, excuse me, excuse me.
Sorry about that.
Oh, we can edit that.
I was going to ask you one more question, and that is, we only have about 30 seconds left, but during the assassination attempt last week in Butler, in Pennsylvania, the building from which the shooter was shooting was unstaffed. There was no security on top of that building and nobody to prevent that shooter from taking a shot. And Travis, we just have a few seconds left, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, that was amazing to me that it was unstaffed. I've been to other rallies and it just never has been the case.
Yeah, and Alan, I've been to presidential rallies. I see snipers all over tall buildings surrounding the presidential space.
Right, but I've also been to rallies where, especially ones that are outside, that you can look around and you could easily understand how something can happen. And it looks like that this young man was another lost soul with easy access to a weapon, and that's a problem.
And he was looking online, not just at the president's, the former president's schedule, but also at Democrats.
Yeah,
he was
the
looking
Democratic
online.
National Convention.
Yeah, so he looked like he was looking for somebody to kill.
It appears that this was not, and we don't know everything yet, but it does not appear to be a politically motivated attack. It looks like another lost soul with an easy access to a weapon.